Every time a professional severely restricts their caloric intake to maintain a mathematically flawless physique, they actively trigger a cellular panic response that violently drains the brain's finite reserves of adenosine triphosphate. Society glorifies eating clean and extreme fasting as the ultimate markers of elite discipline. Clinical neuroscience classifies it as forced cognitive starvation. By the conclusion of this clinical analysis, the exact neurological protocol to restore metabolic energy and fluid intelligence will be fully exposed. Leaving this data unexamined guarantees a lifetime of exhausted mediocrity disguised as physical health. Modern biohacking and fitness industries have propagated a catastrophic biological misunderstanding. The average high performer is heavily conditioned to believe that maintaining an ultra-lean body fat percentage equates to optimal health and peak cognitive performance. However, analyzing this behavior through the lens of evolutionary biology reveals a severe systemic inefficiency. The human brain, particularly the prefrontal cortex, is an incredibly demanding biological processor. It consumes approximately 20% of the body's total metabolic energy, despite representing only 2% of its physical mass. When an organism intentionally deprives itself of adequate calories to conform to an aesthetic standard, the brain is the very first organ to suffer severe energetic deficits. This behavior fundamentally violates the evolutionary architecture of the central nervous system. For hundreds of thousands of years, the human machine evolved in environments of extreme scarcity. A severe caloric deficit is not interpreted by the brain as a healthy lifestyle choice. It is instantly decoded as a critical threat to survival. The moment the organism enters a prolonged state of caloric restriction, the brain initiates a profound homeostatic response. It aggressively downregulates higher-order cognitive functions, such as complex problem-solving, long-term planning, and emotional regulation, in order to preserve baseline metabolic fuel for essential organ function. The individual believes they are optimizing their health, completely blind to the fact that they are systematically starving the precise neural networks required to execute deep, analytical labor. Why caloric deficits drain ATP? The illusion that extreme dietary discipline enhances productivity completely shatters when measuring the microscopic energy demands of the cerebral cortex. Adenosine triphosphate, or ATP, is the primary energy currency of the cellular machine. Every single cognitive calculation, every moment of deep focus, and every suppressed emotion demands a massive withdrawal from this finite metabolic bank. In the pursuit of remaining flawlessly lean, individuals frequently engage in chronic metabolic stress. This stress actively degrades mitochondrial density within the brain cells. The mitochondria are the cellular powerhouses responsible for generating clean ATP. When the body is deprived of premium glucose and nutrients, the hypersensitive amygdala completely misinterprets this self-imposed starvation as an immediate life-threatening crisis. This terrifying hallucination triggers the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis. It instantly floods the bloodstream with toxic levels of cortisol and adrenaline. The organism biologically prepares for a brutal physical battle or a severe famine. The metabolic cost of this false alarm is monumental. The brain aggressively burns through whatever minimal fuel remains simply to sustain the infinite anxiety loop generated by elevated cortisol. Once this localized energy is entirely depleted, the organism experiences a violent cognitive crash, universally recognized as severe brain fog. The professional feels physically decimated, highly irritable, and utterly exhausted. This paralysis is not a failure of willpower, it is a measurable clinical energy deficit. Chronic starvation accelerates cellular senescence, prematurely aging the neural architecture and destroying the capacity for sustained, deep work. The neurological cost of being lean. Maintaining an exceptionally low body fat percentage year-round is widely misunderstood as a relentless pursuit of excellence. Neurologically, it acts as a massive point of continuous friction that actively sabotages the law of least effort. Behavioral biology dictates that the human brain naturally evolved to conserve precious energy by automating reliable solutions to recurring problems. Habits exist exclusively to reduce cognitive load and free up mental bandwidth. However, adhering to a hyper-restrictive diet, constantly weighing food, calculating macros, and suppressing natural hunger signals introduces severe, unbroken cognitive friction into the daily routine. The organism is fighting an unwinnable biological war against its own survival instincts. This constant internal battle violently drains the prefrontal cortex. The individual is forced to use the conscious, rational mind, often referred to as System 2 by behavioral psychologists, to manually override millions of years of evolutionary programming that is screaming at the organism to consume calories. The metabolic tax of this forced conscious processing is utterly unsustainable. It leaves absolutely zero mental bandwidth for high-level creative or analytical tasks. The individual arrives at their workspace believing they are ready to execute complex labor, entirely unaware that their capacity for fluid intelligence has already been decimated simply by the effort required to ignore their own hunger. They are sacrificing immense professional and intellectual leverage merely to maintain the aesthetic appearance of discipline. How hunger erases fluid intelligence. Fluid intelligence is the raw biological capacity to think logically, connect disparate concepts, and solve novel problems independent of previously acquired knowledge. It strictly requires a pristine, unburdened neural network operating with abundant metabolic fuel to function at peak capacity. When the organism is subjected to the chronic stress of extreme dieting, the neurological balance of the brain is violently disrupted. Clinical research into the dopamine-driven feedback loop reveals a deeply disturbing reality about chronic restriction. The human brain processes physical pain and psychological pleasure in the exact same geometric location. They operate as a neurological seesaw. The constant physical discomfort of hunger and the psychological friction of dietary restriction act as a continuous pain stimulus on the central nervous system. To balance this overwhelming physiological pain, the brain initiates a severe homeostatic response. It aggressively down-regulates its own dopamine receptors, plunging the organism into a permanent state of anhedonia, clinical apathy, and profound mental fatigue. The individual completely loses their intrinsic drive to execute difficult tasks. Furthermore, the elevated cortisol levels associated with chronic hunger physically degrade the hippocampus, the exact geometric region responsible for spatial memory, learning, and emotional regulation. The neural pathways associated with logic and execution systematically shrink. The tragic, inescapable irony is that the immense effort expended to maintain a flawless physique actively destroys the physical cognitive machinery required to be highly effective in the modern world. The organism becomes functionally less intelligent. Overrestriction is an active self-sabotage protocol that directly induces a measurable IQ drop. Toxic loop of starving neurons. This horrific cognitive decay dictates all external behavior, creating a cycle that actively destroys true human leverage while providing a false sense of superiority. The illusion of progress is the absolute most dangerous component of the eating clean glitch. The human brain frequently fails to distinguish between being in motion and taking action. Motion consists of planning, obsessing over macronutrients, and rigidly controlling food intake. It feels exactly like hard work. It provides a cheap artificial dopamine hit, falsely signaling that the individual is highly disciplined and superior to the masses. But this motion never produces a final, tangible outcome in the real world of professional leverage. Action is the only behavior that delivers a physical, intellectual result. When a dysregulated nervous system cannot exert control over complex external variables, such as building a business or mastering a difficult skill, it retreats to controlling the easiest internal variable, food intake. The individual becomes hopelessly addicted to the planning and restriction phase. The organism avoids the harsh, judgmental reality of deep analytical execution, retreating permanently into the safe, sterile environment of tracking calories. They confuse the friction of starvation with forward momentum. This is a trauma response designed to mask an unoptimized life. The professional trades the terrifying risk of intellectual failure for the safe, predictable pain of hunger, ensuring their true potential remains entirely unrealized. Reprogramming metabolic energy. To completely eradicate this biological glitch, the individual must permanently stop treating their body as an aesthetic ornament and begin ruthlessly treating it as an elite cognitive machine. Top 1% of global performers, the true intellectual elite, do not rely on sheer mental discipline to endure starvation. They understand that willpower is a highly inefficient survival response that violently drains the prefrontal cortex. Instead, the elite deploy the principles of Medicine 3. They engineer environments of absolute metabolic abundance. They do not optimize for low body fat. They optimize for maximum mitochondrial density and infinite ATP production. True cognitive dominance requires fueling the biological machine with dense, high-quality nutrients that keep cortisol at absolute baseline levels. The preservation of cellular ATP and the fierce protection of fluid intelligence are the ultimate metrics of success. The organism must be fed so the brain can execute. When the brain is no longer forced to process the continuous pain of starvation, massive reserves of metabolic energy are liberated. This preserved ATP is instantly redirected toward deep memory consolidation, hyperdense analytical labor, and unparalleled creative output. Society heavily profits by keeping the masses permanently obsessed with the superficial metrics of extreme fitness, drowning in endless restriction and cognitive fog. But true leverage requires the ruthless clinical elimination of all metabolic friction. The critical question remains: is the modern professional aggressively optimizing their biology for elite cognitive output, or are they secretly starving their neurons just to maintain the illusion of discipline? Drop the answer in the comments below, as engaging with this clinical data physically reinforces a new neurological baseline. If this classified breakdown exposed the metabolic trap in the system, subscribe and activate the notification bell. The global elite engineer their reality to make focus inevitable. Stop starving the machine, start executing.